Hey there! You're listening to Sun Sister Podcast. This podcast is following my interrail trip across Europe during the spring of 2023. For 3 months, I interviewed women I met along the road to talk about their personal stories and women's rights in their country. Today, you'll be listening to Bethany from the United States. Bethany was born and raised in New Hampshire, US. As soon as she graduated from mechanical engineering, she started a giant project, solo traveling for 1 year, learning about environment activism around the world. I met her when I started my trip in Croatia, where she was volunteering for a movie festival about eco-feminism. We recorded this right in the middle of a park in Zagreb. In this episode, we talked about intersectionality, the imposter syndrome, and travel-euphoria. Enjoy! Alright, so good afternoon, Bethany. Welcome to this new podcast, which is dedicated to feminism and gender equality around the world.
Very cool.
So I'm Laurie, and I am with Bethany that I just met actually 1 day ago, like yesterday. So you've been traveling for 8 months in Europe. No, not only in Europe, in the world actually. Yeah. Pursuing a special project that you're going to talk about. And we're now sitting in Zagreb, capital of Croatia, in the middle of a park. So I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So to start with, could you please tell us what is your inner weather today? And be super honest, or what you want.
My inner weather today. That's such a lovely way of putting that. Yeah, it's a little cloudy. It's like, I think it's the sort of cloudy day where it looks like it might rain, but you're not really sure. It's not raining yet, so like, you know, kind of like today, actually. Like the actual weather right now.
I love that. So like your inside is with your outside environment. Yeah. That's perfect. So Bethany, you were born and raised in New Hampshire in the US. Could you please tell us what is your life story?
Yeah. So I wasn't actually born in New Hampshire, technically, although I don't admit that. But I was technically born in Massachusetts, which is just to the south of New Hampshire. But there's kind of a little bit of a feud between the two states. So if you were to ask me, I am firmly from New Hampshire, no doubt.
Good.
And yeah, I grew up like living in New Hampshire and super chill, happy childhood, surrounded by nature a lot, going to like summer camps and going hiking, and New Hampshire is known for its nature, so definitely had a lot of that growing up.
So cool.
And did a lot of like activities and things, sports, music, stuff like that. And then in high school, I got really into robotics. And that led me to think that maybe I wanted an engineering degree after I graduated high school. And then also in my senior year of high school, I took my first intro to environmental science class.
Nice.
And that was, I could not have predicted all of the ways that would change my life, which is funny because, no offense, love Mr. Grant, but wow, that was not that great of a class. But
I hope they never listen.
I would tell him to his face. Great guy. Such a silly class. But clearly it was just the information I needed to hear, because I quickly became very passionate about environmentalism and climate change specifically. And so then I still went for an engineering degree for like my bachelor's, but also took like every single environmental class that I could at my school. And also got really involved with environmental activism at my university. And so I did a lot of sort of this like small scale like university organizing of, you know, getting people to care about these issues and teaching them about how our schools like recycling and trash and compost system worked, and advocating for clean energy programs. And yeah, so I did a lot of like that work, and my sort of like crowning achievement was trying to bring back a climate action plan for my university. And like when I graduated, they were like much more actively working on it than they had been for the previous 10 years. So very exciting.
Wow.
for that. And then, yeah, in my senior year of university, I was about to graduate with a mechanical engineering degree, and I was figuring out, like, what the heck happens next. And I applied for this random thing called the Watson Fellowship. And basically the premise of the Watson is that if you were given funding to travel around the world for a year to pursue an independent passion project, what would you do? And at this point, like, I had just finished my 4 years in engineering, and I had kind of become like a big fish in a small pond of like environmental activism at my university. Like, I was the one that everybody asked all the questions, and like I was the person that everybody turned to for all of the environmental things on my campus, which was really cool. But I was kind of like, yeah, like, this is a campus of 2,000 people. Like, it was very small.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to get to know, like, what activism looks like around the world and learn a lot more about, like, everything I didn't know, you know? Like, I had a very narrow idea of sustainability and, like, what it means to work on the environment and work in this space and what the space even looks like. And so I decided for my Watson fellowship that I was, like, this project I was proposing, that I wanted to go learn about environmental organizations and environmental efforts around the world. And then, so I applied for that in, like, November of 2021. Yeah. Yeah. And
Looks like a long time ago.
Yeah. And then in March of 2022, I found out that I got it, which was crazy. And then I graduated with my bachelor's degree in June 2022, and I left for a year abroad in end of July last year, 2022. So, and then I've been traveling since then.
Girl, what a life.
Yeah.
You've done so much.
Thanks, I try.
And I mean, the environment is such emergency subject, so that's amazing that you're covering it and bringing new ideas from around the world to yourself, to back to where you're going to work afterwards. So that's amazing.
Yeah, that's the hope.
I think you're doing great.
Thank you.
Is there one thing that makes you vibrate in your everyday life?
I think, like, on my trip, some of my favorite days have been the days that I've gotten to just, like, see and appreciate people interacting with nature. And I kind of call those days, like, my travel euphoria. Like, when I'm like, wait, like, this is my life. Like, what the heck? And so one of those days was hanging out in an elephant sanctuary in Cambodia back in September.
Whoa.
And one of those days was my first time skiing in the Alps in Switzerland in December. And another one of those days was a super random, like, touristy experience that I had in Eastern Turkey a couple weeks ago. And I think, like, those are the things that I turn to when I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm really tired. It doesn't feel like it's going well. And you kind of remember that, like, for climate change, for example, like, I feel like a lot of the discussion ends up being like, we're either going to solve it or we're not. And actually, like, everything that we can do to make it slightly better still has so much impact in the end. And yeah, so I think, like, that idea keeps me going, and, like, I'm doing it to make sure that all those random experiences that I've gotten to have around the world, like, keep happening, you know?
That's amazing. I love the travel-euphoria.
Yeah.
I experienced it a bit also, I think. I love the words. Thank you for your answer on this. Do you consider yourself well surrounded?
I would say definitely yes. I have, if anything, while I've been abroad, I have learned, like, how wonderful my support system at home is, actually. Like, I've heard from some people who are solo traveling a while who kind of say, like, they kind of struggle with, like, maintaining connections with the people that they have back home. And I don't know if it's just because I have spent more time on the phone with people than I ever could have predicted, but, like, I definitely have had some amazing support from people back home, and, like, navigating time changes and, weird travel stories and people being there for me, like, when I was at my, like, loneliest and really wasn't feeling very connected to the people that I have met along the way. Or, like, I have met really amazing people. And, so, like, building new communities in that sense as well. And being able to meet up with people in their home countries now that I'm in Europe. Like, I've met a couple people again, like, who I met back in Southeast Asia when I started.
Cool.
Yeah, even actually here in Zagreb, like on Wednesday, I got drinks with somebody that I met in Cambodia.
I love that.
Yeah. I think it is kind of a much smaller world than we think, you know?
Sure.
Yeah. So I have definitely a really nice community. And for the most part, a really nice community of women also.
I love that. Well, that's an amazing transition.
Yeah.
Girl. So now, going to the more gender feminism part.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please give us like your own personal definition of feminism?
Mm-hmm. I think feminism is, wanting equality for everyone across like the whole gender spectrum. A couple of years ago, I probably would have said between men and women, but I think we're all growing past that binary as well. And I think like feminism is as well, which is really cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think it's really important to like not reduce it to just like cis women, for sure. Thank you for pointing this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the $1 million question: do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's not something that I like think about every day because I do have like my mind on climate change most of the time, and so
really important too.
I think absolutely, and I think like when I feel closest to feminist issues is when like learning about the intersection of gender and climate, because it is such an important aspect of the climate movement, and I am a firm like believer that we can't really solve climate change without addressing like patriarchy as well.
For sure.
And so I think like that's sort of my brand of feminism, if that makes sense, is like, like we all have the things that we know we care about. And for some people, it's like topics of gender outright, maybe like you. But then for a lot of people, they have their other issues, and it's kind of like where feminism intersects with that.
Yes.
And I think I kind of like find myself there. Yeah.
Amazing.
Where, I wish I did more for like other like feminist issues, but at least I know like feminism and gender and climate, that's where I find my passion.
I'm sure you're doing like a lot. Like when I ask this question, like sometimes it's like people are like, oh, maybe I should do more. I'm like, no, I'm not like pressuring this. And you're so right. Like eco-feminism is a whole thing, and those two things, they don't work without one or each other. So I can just agree with this. Thank you. So are there some ways where you express your feminism, I guess maybe in environment subjects?
Yeah. Well, I guess in one way, not really related to climate necessarily, but I think like being a female solo traveler, just you automatically are going against very patriarchal ideas ideas of like being able to travel alone as a woman, and like having the confidence and determination to do that. And I think it's simultaneously like easier than people think it is, but then also still like extremely draining at the end of the day. At least at the end of certain days. And so I think like right now that's probably the biggest like feminist action that I take, is just by being out here doing this project that I'm doing alone for the past 8 months. And then in like the climate space, one of my like personal climate icons is this climate feminist, as she has coined herself, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. Amazing. And she's a US based marine biologist, actually, is like her like academic background, and she works on issues of climate and the ocean. But she's also co-edited an anthology of like poems and essays and some artwork as well, written by women in the climate space. And so it's a really, really beautiful book. It's one of my favorite books. It's called All We Can Save. And I think...
All We Can Save?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And I think like that's one of my favorite just like works about feminism. And reading that always makes me feel like, yes, like we've got this. Like women have got this.
I love the reference. Like I didn't knew her, but I'll definitely check on this.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's so cool. And
amazing.
they've produced like a whole project about it where it's now like a whole sort of program to try and bring more people into the climate space and like build places and spaces for people to talk about like the intersection of gender and climate further, which is really cool.
Amazing. Oh, that's great. We need human beings like this. Yeah, for sure. And yes, so you talked about like expressing your feminism while traveling solo and while like in environment issues, but I think also like being in tech. Mm-hmm. I think it's growing now, but this is still a thing, and this is sad. But like being in tech is not so common yet. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also an amazing way.
Yeah, it's funny, while I've been traveling, I've kind of felt like very disconnected from my like engineering self-identity, and so I kind of forgot about that. But yeah, definitely.
I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that is something I am also. So yes, I definitely agree. Like trying to bring women into the engineering space, and like at my university, I was very lucky. We're almost about a quarter of my graduating class of engineering, like in my engineering program, were women. But the fact that I was lucky for it to be 25% is like kind of a bummer.
Oh, a quarter. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fuck.
So, and that was like high for my school.
I know.
So
I think it's like 16% or 11, something like this. It's less than 20 for sure.
Yeah. So I actually had like a very cool cohort of women that we were all like supporting each other and everything in my graduating class. And I think recently in my university, in the program that I was in, they've also been doing more work where the female professors have been sort of trying to build partnership and community among the women in the department, which is really cool as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
In Hampshire then?
In New York.
In New York.
Where I went to school, yeah.
Amazing. Is there a feminist book that blew your mind? I think you're I
think I spoiled this question.
Such an event.
Yeah. I swear, I didn't have the questions beforehand. I think definitely All We Can Save. Yeah. I haven't read like that many feminist books, but that one, it has just so much diversity in the perspectives that it brings to light, and also among people of color as well. Because Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson herself is Black, and like makes a point to really raise those voices as well. And so it's a very intersectional book. And I think that's been one of the really cool parts about at least the environmental movement in the US, and I'm still learning about the environmental movement across Europe. But it's definitely growing much more intersectional to really cater to issues that involve gender and like racism as well. And so like this book, All We Can Save, really like covers a lot of those topics.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So now focusing more on your country of origin. Mm-hmm. So how would you describe the situation for women and gender minorities in the US?
I think right now it's pretty devastating in the US.
Well, it's a big word.
Yeah, and it's only getting worse, and I think I've been pretty removed from it also.
Yeah, right.
Like being away for the last 8 months has been kind of strange to be like hearing about all of these things just like, you know, from online news articles and stuff. And oftentimes being the only American in a space and not really wanting to bring it up in spaces, you know? But yeah, the laws that are getting passed to continue restricting abortion access, and as well as like gender affirming care across the country is just, it's a huge problem that we're facing. And I think it can feel very overwhelming as, you know, anyone who doesn't necessarily know how to work on those sorts of issues in like your day-to-day life. That's something that we all find, I think, where you're like, there are so many problems going on and so many bad things happening, and how do I work on all of them? And like especially being like across the pond, so to speak, from all of this as it's happening, like I feel simultaneously like very distraught about it, but also very removed from it. And like it's just something that I'm reading from far away, you know. It's a weird feeling.
Yeah, I imagine so. Because you left in July, right?
Yeah.
So that it just happened. Rose's Way thing. Oh, wow. I also talked about this with Christina, which I interviewed just before, who is also from the US. But yeah, I was there in June, and it was. I was in France in June, and that really like it brings me in the street. Like it brought me in the street. I was like, there were some kind of very wild riots, like just women and also other people like reuniting, and I was like, how can it happen in the US? Like literally. And you're right, it's just always worse. Like you see, this another state who restrict it, or sometimes some like destructive things, like minors like that are pregnant and they're not allowed. Like that is so sad, and that must be like hard for you to see this and hear this like from very far away. It must protect you also, as you were saying. But,
yeah. I feel kind of in a little travel bubble. But at the same time, like, I still, like, am going home there and still know people who are being impacted. And even if I didn't, right? Like, it is one of those difficult things to navigate, like, how much you can sort of, like, wear your heart on your sleeve when you're reading the news about stuff like that, and how much you can really allow yourself to, like, focus on those sorts of issues while also having to continue to do your own like day-to-day work,
which is also very, very important work and pretty emergent. Thank you so much for sharing this. Do you remember like the first time you experienced gender inequality? If you ever did. That's a funny thing.
Definitely have. I think, like, first time that I can really remember it, it wasn't actually even something that was happening to me, but it was a friend of mine, and I was doing robotics, as I mentioned, in high school. And I have a friend who was incredibly, incredibly smart. She was 2 years older than me, and she had gotten a really cool like academic scholarship to get an internship at a really big engineering company that was based like near our town. And she was really excited about it. It was going to be a lot of work. It was a very like prestigious opportunity. And some of our own friends, our own male friends, like made jokes to her saying that she only got it because of her boobs.
Really?
Yeah. And it was like, they totally thought they were joking, but she and I were kind of like it's not funny, it's not meaningful, like it builds on a lot of existing stereotypes, like you know where that's coming from. And it was just, again, like it was just some stupid teenage boys, but it was kind of like, this is like, she's your friend, and you know, what are we doing here? And of course, like we all reassured her and like called them out for it, and we're like, you know, what a stupid thing to say.
That's good.
But it definitely like it hit her, and she was kind of like, these are my own friends and they're the ones like making jokes about this, like how can I ever be really taken seriously in this space? And that was only in high school, so that was before even like the worst of the imposter syndrome really hits, you know.
For sure. God, did they apologize afterwards?
No, I don't think they ever really got it, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was just like a weird like culture of masculinity, of toxic masculinity. Yeah.
That's so good that you stand up for her.
Yeah.
Wow. So, like, you talked about actually the imposter syndrome. Like, how do you address it if you experience it yourself?
I think one of the best ways that I found to address imposter syndrome has been by like turning to my support system of like fellow women in these spaces. And I think that's one of the most important things that I found, like having other friends who are women in like tech spaces and engineering spaces is also like being prepared for the inevitable moment when we all, you know, feel it and are like, what are we doing? We don't belong here. And, you know, being prepared to like encourage everyone and make jokes about it and try and like make it a little bit lighter.
Okay.
Because like I think a lot of my friends are one of a few women in their like either their academic programs or their workplaces now. But we've all felt it and we're all familiar with the feeling. And so, really encouraging each other through it and being there to like both just listen when people want to like talk about the experience, but then also being prepared to either distract or provide solutions too.
This is so important.
Yeah.
It's such a good way. Yes, of course, to rely on your community and with small things, like just listening or making jokes about this. That's so cool. And we all need this kind of community in our field, I think.
Yeah.
Especially those fields that are like least common for women to be in. But hopefully it's going to change.
Yes.
Do you think there is like one thing that could reduce gender inequalities in the US?
I think education is such an important part of any issue in the whole world, basically.
Yes.
And I think like gender is no different than that. And like successful education, honestly, about like the continued like gender inequality that exists.
Yes.
Because I think many of the places where it is most prevalent in the US are also the places where like local populations might not believe that it's happening.
Yeah.
You know, might be in a bit of denial that, you know, there really is gender inequality still occurring. And so, continuing to educate people that it is happening and that like their own choices are also contributing to it. I mean, I think you read about abortion, for example, and it's such an important issue. And so much of it does come down to education, because even many like pro-life arguments aren't being met by sort of like
knowledge.
Like, like education.
Yeah, they lack education,
Yeah, and a lot of the times, like pro-choice arguments come down to sort of like my body, my choice.
Yeah.
But if you're talking to somebody who believes that abortion is murder, then they still don't want you to murder your own child.
Yeah,
you know? Like, even if it is your own child, they still don't. And so I think like that's one of the biggest areas where people on both sides could do a much better job of listening to each other and like gaining education on what the other people are thinking.
Yes,
also.
for sure.
Because I think right now a lot of arguments about abortion specifically in the US are just missing each other, you know? Like it's just people like shouting at walls that are not listening.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's very interesting what you said, that maybe more confrontation between those ideas like could be a good thing for sure. That might be triggering for pro-choice, of course, but
I think in order to have more concrete change, we all need a much better understanding of like what our opposition believes and why.
Yes.
And like where their ideals are coming from, to be able to address, you know, those concerns and those ideals like properly.
For sure. That's very good. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going towards the end. Would you like to add or change something to your definition of feminism that you gave earlier? Now we talked about all of those things.
I think my definition of feminism was very broad, and so I think it's still, it still fits. And I think just adding a part about intersectionality to it is really important, because I don't think any gender issues can be solved without addressing racial issues, and that's, such an important aspect of all of this. And then same thing with, like, climate issues, you know, like, we can't solve climate change without also addressing, like, racism and patriarchy. So I think it's all very intersectional. And the more that we realize that it's intersectional and, like, bring those communities together to grow solutions sort of more organically, rather than trying to produce solutions and then think about, like, the marginalized communities or populations after the fact. Like, we can only be more effective by having those conversations up front and making everyone part of the solution building.
Well, I can only agree with this. Thank you so much. So now, like, opening on and concluding maybe on a more personal part. Are you in touch with your inner child?
My inner child. I actually had a very introspective moment when I was in Malaysia.
Amazing.
I found two people to hang out with just at a hostel who were both a bit older than me, but I also, like, was very honest about how young I am, because I think it comes up a lot with the work that I'm doing, and, you know, how it sounds very cool and official, but I'm only 22, almost 23. But
we don't even knew, you know. We didn't talk about this.
I don't kind of talk about it almost on purpose, because I think there is this sort of, like, people assume I'm older, and I'm okay with people assuming that. But when I was with these people in Malaysia, like, they already knew my age, and, like, you know, I was younger than both of them by, like, over a decade.
Okay.
But they were just so, like, silly and goofy, and we went to a night, like, street market, and it was pouring out, and, like, we were just getting soaking wet and just, like, walking up and down, picking our favorite foods. And there was one stall that was selling, like, bao buns.
Okay.
But they were the kind that you see online that are all different characters, like, where they were, there was, like, a SpongeBob one, and, like, a Minion, and, like, a whole bunch of random things. And one of them was Totoro from the movie My Neighbor Totoro. And, and I love Totoro. And he's just, like, so innocent and adorable. And I was just so excited to have this bao bun. And I, like, walked by it originally. I was like, no, like, I don't need it. And I went back for it. And then I was just walking him around, like, with my biggest smile of my whole trip. I was just having such an amazing time being so goofy and silly with these two people. And I really did, like, let myself just lean into, like, the giggles and the, you know, all of that. And I think when you are, like, traveling solo, as a female especially, like, you want to be coming across as very confident and capable and, like, independent, like, all the time. And I just, like, found such comfort in these two people that I was hanging out with that, like, I didn't feel the need to have that sort of persona. And I kind of, like, let it slip a little bit. And it was so much fun. And I really felt like it was the first time I had done that in a while, which is why that moment, like, stuck out to me.
Amazing.
Especially. So I think, like, there are moments, for sure, that I'm still in touch with my inner child. And when I'm, like, most comfortable, I think, is when it like, comes out, you know? When I don't feel the need to have that persona of, like, I'm super capable and strong and I don't need anything or anyone.
That's amazing. Yeah, you seem like you're so much in touch, like, really.
So it happens when you're alone for 8 months, right? You do a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah, you lose biases, and you're, like, on the other part of the world, and, like, okay, I can be where I want. So I'm so glad. Probably those two other friends you had there, like, that they were, like, around the 30s, they were probably in touch with the child too, like, for sure.
It seems like it.
I love that. When you meet this kind of people, it marks you, I think. Like, so cool.
Yeah. And one of them is somebody that I got to meet up with again in her hometown. So that was amazing.
There you go.
Yeah.
You could special bond, I think, with those people. Thank you so much. If you could say something to your past 10 years old, what would that be?
Wow. When I was 10, I think all I knew was that I wanted to help people. And I'd like to think that I am doing that and have been doing that. And so I think I want to tell her to chill out. And like,
I love that.
Yeah, like I think I took myself very seriously, you know? I wanted to make the most of what I considered like my gifts, and I wanted to make sure that I was using them properly and all those things. And I think I could have had a little more fun, you know? Like I could have had faith that it was all going to work out and I was going to do my best and that was going to be good enough.
Yeah, what a nice response. Well, you can go back to your inner child and say that, and like always on the streets in Zagreb, like being silly. I love that. Is there one person that inspires you a lot?
I think this is probably a pretty common answer, but my mom.
Maybe not. We'll see.
Yeah, my mom inspires me a lot. She's very involved and cares a lot about a lot of things. And she's always like juggling so many different activities and responsibilities, and always does her best to make sure that other people are like getting their needs met and taking care of all of these things. And
amazing.
Yeah, she's really inspiring in that way.
That's amazing. And our last question. So, as a US woman, what message would you like to share to other women and people from gender minorities that are listening to us?
I think going back to what I was sort of saying before about both like intersectionality and also like doing our best, even when it can be like really difficult, but doing our best to try to understand sort of like where the opposition is coming from. Not to like sympathize with them necessarily, but to better understand like how we can more effectively be making these arguments and be making movements that are gonna result in the change that we want to see, I think.
Well, that's beautiful. That's such a beautiful way to end the podcast. Well, thank you so much. It was amazing to interview you, and I'm so glad that you shared all of this. You're very impressive, honestly, for what you're saying. Maybe I'll cut this, I don't know. I'm saying this now. Really.
It was so much fun. I love talking about this stuff. It's so fun.
Thanks
you so
for
much. Asking me.
Thank you.
It was Sun Sister Podcast. Thank you for listening and